Greetings. Welcome to our FAFSA walkthrough webinar. This webinar is in partnership with our colleagues at uAspire. My name is Jamia Tenney, and I will serve as your host today. Here at the Common App, I serve as Director of Student Engagement Programs, where I collaborate daily with my colleagues across the organization to develop and highlight resources that support students in the admissions and enrollment processes. So let's just talk a bit about what we will do during this session today. During this session, you will have a better understanding of this year's FAFSA process and how to get started. Also, we'll identify known challenges that you may encounter in the FAFSA and how to solve for those challenges. Let's go through a few housekeeping items. Note that this session is being recorded and will be available on Common App's YouTube page. So don't forget to visit back at Common App Media on YouTube to view this session at a later date, should you need it. If questions arise during the session, please know that you can place them in the chat area. The Common App and uAspire teams will be monitoring the chats throughout the session. We'll have a general question Q&A session at the end, so you'll have an opportunity to get your questions answered. I would now like to introduce our colleagues from uAspire, who will also serve as session facilitators and hostess during this session. First, Erin Curl is a project coordinator from the customized support team at uAspire. In Erin's role, she assists with uAspire's college affordability webinars and in-person presentations, helping educate a range of audiences on the financial aid process. Erin will be facilitating the session. Also, we have our colleague Nick Raymond, who is a project-based advisor for uAspire. Nick supports students and families through financial aid and provides them with the necessary tools and resources to make informed decisions. Nick will provide support to you in the chat. So again, if you have questions in the chat, Nick will provide support to you there. We'll also have a Q&A period at the end that you'll be able to answer. Before we get started, I wanted to highlight the webinar session. During this particular time, we'll be talking about some resources that we provide to support you in the FAFSA, but I also wanted to highlight our website. So commonapp.org, we have our Paying for College page, and we have a few resources there to support you. First, our FAFSA advising tool, which is a wired texting tool that is available that you can use 24/7 to support you as you navigate the FAFSA. Also there, we share links to the FSA video resources that you might need to navigate pieces of the FAFSA, as well as resources on scholarships. So don't forget to take advantage of those resources on the commonapp.org website. You'll go there and then click Plan for College, and you'll find those particular resources. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Erin, from uAspire to conduct the session. Erin, off to you.
Thank you so much, Jamia, for that wonderful introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn a little bit more about the FAFSA. Before we jump into everything, I'm just going to go over a few things. If you have any questions, send them in through the comment tool. We will try to respond to them as best we can throughout the presentation. There are also going to be QR codes that you're going to see on some of the slides, so make sure to take advantage of them. Have your phone and camera ready for when they do crop up so that you can scan them and get those resources. And then finally, there will be a survey that we're going to ask you all to fill out, followed by some live question and answer time. So getting into our agenda in a little bit more detail. First, we're going to introduce the FAFSA, then talk about what you need to do before starting the form. Then we're going to go through the FAFSA section by section, breaking it down so you know what to expect as you're filling it out. Next, we will talk about what comes after you fill out the FAFSA, what next steps you can expect. Then we're going to let you know the ways in which you can get support from uAspire. And then finally, we are going to end with some live question and answer time, like I said, as well as that feedback survey. The FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is a federal form that you will need to complete every year that you plan to attend college. There were some changes to the form this year, and the 24-25 FAFSA was released a bit later in December of 2023. In future years, it will go back to opening on October 1st. The FAFSA does two main things for a student. One, it determines their eligibility for federal financial aid. And two, states and colleges may use this information to distribute their own financial aid funds. Unfortunately, there are limitations to eligibility when it comes to filling out the FAFSA. Certain statuses like undocumented, DACA, or other ineligible non-US citizens are not able to receive federal financial aid. However, depending on the state that you live in, you might be able to fill out additional state forms. You should check with your state to see if you are eligible to receive state financial aid and just find out what is out there for you. Colleges might have their own policies regarding institutional aid eligibility as well. If you're undocumented, we also recommend calling the colleges that you're planning to apply to assess what their financial aid policies are for undocumented students. We've also linked here some additional resources that you can check out for more information. At the end of the day, citizenship status does not have to be a barrier to college admission or college affordability. Please reach out to the support services around you or to uAspire to discuss your options. Now that we know a little bit more about what the FAFSA is, let's discuss some steps that you should take before you sit down and start the form. First, you and at least one parent should make an FSA ID if you haven't already. An FSA ID is your username and password that will serve as your legal signature when you sign and submit the FAFSA. A verified FSA ID is required to be able to complete the FAFSA. It's also going to be used to do other things on Federal Student Aid's website, so it's a critical first step in the process. In order to create your FSA ID, you're going to go to studentaid.gov and click Create Account in the upper right-hand corner. In a normal year, it takes 1 to 3 days for an FSA ID to be created and confirmed by Federal Student Aid, but this year we've noticed it can take up to a week for that to happen. Because a verified FSA ID is required to complete the FAFSA, we really recommend that you create your FSA IDs at least a week before you complete the FAFSA. If you've not yet created an FSA ID, you should do so as soon as possible. The application is available in both English and in Spanish. For help making your FSA ID, I encourage you to check out uAspire's handout, which is available in several different languages. uAspire also has another great checklist that can help you stay organized when you complete your FAFSA. It will go over all of the information that you need to have on hand when you sit down to fill out the form. It goes over, what documents you might need, and it can help prepare you basically for the FAFSA so that you're prepared when you sit down to complete it. Now let's look at the FAFSA section by section, breaking it down so you know what questions to expect. I do want to share a quick note though before we get into all of that. We are going to be looking at the FAFSA today from the point of view of a dependent student starting the FAFSA. A dependent student is a student who is required to report parent information on the form. As a result, we're also going to be discussing the parent invitation process. For independent students, your section will look really similar to the dependent student section, but it might also include a few additional questions. We are going to be talking about those in more detail a little bit later on in this presentation. The first thing you will do when you log in to start a new FAFSA form is select whether you are a student or a parent. Depending on who you are, you're going to see some different questions. Today, we will be completing the FAFSA as a dependent student starting the form before their parents, so we're going to click Student. In the Student Identity Information section, you should review the information they have listed for you and update it if necessary. You can change your permanent mailing address directly on the FAFSA form, but if you need to update any other student identity information, you're going to need to go to Account Settings to do that. After that, you'll then confirm the state you live in and the month and the year that you began living there. If you've lived in that state your entire life, you would put the month and the year of your birth. These state residency questions are important because they may be used to determine your eligibility for state financial aid and in-state tuition. Next is one of the most important parts of the FAFSA. In order to be eligible for federal financial aid, you will be required to provide consent on the FAFSA form. When you provide consent, you give the IRS permission to share your federal tax information with the FAFSA to determine your eligibility for federal financial aid. Consent is required no matter who you are on the FAFSA, whether you're a student or a parent, whether you filed taxes or didn't file taxes. There is a ton of information on the consent page, so be sure to read through it carefully. On this slide, we're only showing screenshots of the summary and the FAQs. At the end of the page, after the frequently asked questions, you will provide consent by clicking Approve. Now that we've gotten through some of the first pages of the FAFSA, let's get into more of the sections, starting with personal circumstances. The Student Personal Circumstances section of the FAFSA will determine your dependency status. A student can be dependent, meaning that you will need to include parent information, or a student can be independent, meaning that parent information will not be required. If none of the circumstances that you can see on this slide apply to you, then you will be considered a dependent student, meaning that you will need to invite at least one parent to provide information on your FAFSA form. However, if any of the circumstances do apply to you, then you will not need to provide parent information on your FAFSA. Again, just to reemphasize, you will be considered independent if any of the scenarios on this slide apply to you. The FAFSA will determine that by asking you various questions, and as I said earlier, if you're an independent student, your FAFSA will look really similar to the dependent pathway, but you will have to provide some additional information and you might need to answer some additional questions as well. In the Student Personal Circumstances section, you're also going to need to include your college grade level and if you have a bachelor's degree yet, which is a 4-year college degree. If you're a senior in high school and you've never attended college before, you're going to select first-year freshman here and indicate that you do not yet have a bachelor's degree. Even if you took AP classes in school or dual enrollment classes at your local community college, you are still considered a first-year college student. There may be some additional reasons that you could be considered independent, referred to as unusual circumstances on the FAFSA. If any of the circumstances listed for this question are true for you, you're going to say yes, and then you will be considered what's called provisionally independent on the FAFSA. Provisional means that you will need to provide documentation to your colleges to confirm these circumstances later on in the financial aid process. So if any of them do apply to you, just make sure you have the documentation ready to submit when requested. After answering all of the dependency questions, you'll then get your dependency status. If you answered yes to any of the questions that we just covered, then you will be independent, and then you won't need to invite your parents to provide their information on your FAFSA. However, if none of the circumstances applied to you, then you are considered a dependent student, and you will need to include parent information and invite them. If for some reason you cannot provide parent information, you can choose on this page to apply for a direct unsubsidized loan only. This question has been confusing for some students, so make sure to select no here if your parents are willing to share their information on your FAFSA. If the FAFSA requires you to include parent information, but you can't get it for a reason other than those listed on the FAFSA, you can start what is called a dependency appeal process. You should know, though, that dependency appeals or overrides are not guaranteed to be approved, and they may often take a while for a decision to be made. If this process is something you're interested in, we recommend reaching out to your college's financial aid office for more information. So moving forward, now that you know that you're a dependent student, you will then be asked several questions to determine which of your parents should be invited to provide information on the FAFSA. Here are two examples on this slide. One of a student whose biological parents are married to each other, and one where one of the student's parents is remarried. As you can see, the questions are a little bit different depending on the parent's marital status. In order to better prepare to complete the FAFSA, let's take a look at this chart that outlines whose information should be reported on the FAFSA. Remember that the parent on the FAFSA can include biological, adoptive, or step parents. You should determine which of these scenarios is true for your family and then ask that parent or parents to create FSA IDs before they complete the FAFSA. The next step will then be to invite the parents that you just identified on the last page. You will do this by providing some of their information on the FAFSA form. This information does need to be accurate, so even if it might be a little bit embarrassing to ask your parents what their birthday is or what their social security number is, it's really worth it to make sure that they can complete their section so that you can get the financial aid that you deserve. If your parent does not have a social security number, you can click My Parent Doesn't Have an SSN, and then you will just need to enter their address instead. After you've invited your parents, the next section that you'll see is the demographics section. The first 3 demographic questions ask about the student's gender, race, and Hispanic origin, and these questions are really for research purposes only. They will not affect your eligibility for aid, no matter how you answer them. If you would rather not report this information, you can always select Prefer Not to Answer. And again, just to reemphasize, this will not affect your eligibility for financial aid. You just have to click something here. However, the next question that you'll see on the FAFSA does affect student eligibility for federal financial aid because here you will select your citizenship status. We covered this a little bit earlier, but just to remind everyone, in order to be eligible for federal financial aid, you must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. If you are an eligible non-citizen, you will need your A number here, which can be found on a permanent residency card or green card. If you are not eligible to complete the FAFSA, there may be another state-based form that you can complete depending on the state that you live in. Please reach out to your support services, your Department of Education in your state, or uAspire if you have any questions here. We are happy to help. The third section is the student financial section. So for most students, after you consent on the FAFSA, most of the income and tax questions will be answered when the IRS shares, the IRS shares your tax information with federal student aid. Once that information is shared, you will not see those questions. There are some circumstances in which you will need to manually enter your tax information, but those tend to be pretty, uncommon for the most part. If you did not file U.S. taxes at all, there will be no income or tax questions that you need to answer, but you will need to share why you did not file taxes. If for some reason you do need to answer more questions about your tax and income, then you will answer according to your 2022 tax information. Each page or question will also have help text that can help you find any information that you need to report on the FAFSA. There may still be a few tax questions that you'll need to answer after you consent on the FAFSA, so let's review what they are. For students who consent and don't fall into a circumstance where tax and income information needs to be provided manually, these should be the only tax and asset questions that you'll see on the FAFSA. For many of these questions, the answer will be 0. Like I mentioned earlier, any questions that you answer should be about your 2022 tax information. For the next section, the student assets section, you should report the values as of the day that you are completing the FAFSA. For the first question, you can just check your bank account while you're completing the FAFSA and report the amounts that you see there. We're going to talk about assets in a little bit more detail when it's, we're discussing the parent section, but for most students, the last 2 answers to these questions will be 0 when you're answering questions about investments or businesses. The last section before signing your portion of the FAFSA will be the colleges section. In it, you will list your colleges. There are 2 ways that you can add schools. You can add them by state and name or by their federal school code. No matter how you add them, you can only add 20 schools at a time to your FAFSA. If you're applying to more than 20 schools, you will need to wait for the FAFSA to process before deleting your old list and adding the schools that still need to have their FAFSA information sent to them. Then, and finally, you will review the FAFSA. You'll check your answers, make any necessary edits, and here you can also check the status of the contributor or contributors that you invited. After you've reviewed everything, made sure it all looks good, you will sign and complete your section. However, this might not just be the end of the FAFSA process for you yet. If you need a contributor's If you need a contributor's information, for example, to be provided on your FAFSA, you will see a reminder on the next page after signing your section. Again, their information is required to be eligible for federal financial aid, so it's really important that you follow up with them to make sure that their section is completed. So since it is such an important step to receiving, federal financial aid, let's talk about what parent contributors can expect in their sections and how they can submit them too. So first, there are two ways a contributor can log in. The first is through an email that is sent to the email address that the student will list when inviting the parent. From that email, they can click on Log In, which will take them to FAFSA.gov, where they will need to log in with their FSA ID. The second way a parent can log in to complete their section is to go directly to FAFSA.gov, log in with their FSA ID, and find the application under My Activity. And you can access My Activity under the name in the top right corner that you can see in that screenshot. And I will share that the second way on the screen tends to work better for a lot of parents. Most of the parent section is the same or really similar to the student section. Remember again that consent is required from every contributor so that the student can be eligible for federal financial aid. There are a few differences that we will discuss over the next couple of slides, though. Also, just keep in mind that if you're an independent student, you might see some of these questions as well. The first major difference is the family size question. The FAFSA will use the number of individuals claimed on the taxes as the assumed family size. If the family size is different from the tax return, you should provide an updated number here on the FAFSA. FAFSA is not going to share with you the number of dependents it's pulling from your tax form, but you can always check your 1040 form directly to see if your current family size is different. If it is, then you can update it on the FAFSA. If you think it might be different, but you're not able to check your 1040 form for one reason or another, you can go ahead and just update it and put in your current family size on the FAFSA to what it is now, just to be safe. Next, you'll then report the number of people in your household who will be in college for the school year. Parents should not be included in this number. Additionally, the number in college will no longer affect federal financial aid eligibility, but some colleges might use it to determine institutional aid. If you do believe that the number in college will significantly impact your ability to pay for college, you should submit a financial aid appeal, and we have a great resource linked here that we'll talk a little bit more about that you should get access to at the end of the presentation. The parent asset section looks very similar to the student asset section, but it will also ask you about any child support received. If you receive any child support, you will report the total amounts that you received in the last complete calendar year. For businesses, for cash savings and checking, report the values as of the day that you're filling out the FAFSA. You're going to do the same thing for businesses, farms, and investments by reporting the net worth as of the day that you're filling out the form. It's really helpful to have statements on hand for these questions, just to directly refer to them. Let's take a look more, take a closer look at what investments should be reported. Here we have a list of the assets that should and should not be reported on your FAFSA. Remember that retirement plans and the home that you live in are not counted as assets on the FAFSA. Some common ones that we see that do need to be reported on the FAFSA are 529 plans, where the student who's filling out the FAFSA is the beneficiary, or real estate that is not the primary home that the family lives in. Before you can submit the FAFSA, you might need to invite another parent contributor, depending on the tax filing and marital status of your household. Then, once all contributors have signed and submitted the FAFSA, the student's FAFSA will be complete. The student will get a confirmation email, and then the FAFSA will be processed, and students should eventually hear from their colleges after their FAFSA processes. If you don't hear from them after it processes, you should reach out to the schools. There are a few more steps to do after the FAFSA, so let's also talk a little bit more about what comes next. So we're going to go over some of these next steps in more detail. It's really best to think of the FAFSA as the starting gate of the financial aid process and not the finish line. So there are a few other steps that you will need to take to ensure that you're getting all of the financial aid that you can. Though we will be going over these steps briefly today, before closing out, we will also be discussing some of the ways you can get follow-up on any of these steps in the future. Remember also that you should be researching and applying to scholarships all year round. If you're interested in them being a part of your financial aid package, don't wait until the last minute because there might not be as many scholarships available at that point. The FAFSA Submission Summary provides all of the information a student reported on their FAFSA. It will provide a line-by-line review of the FAFSA's questions and your responses to those questions. Reviewing your submission summary is really important because it includes key information about your FAFSA and your financial aid eligibility. It will indicate if any of the answers reported on the FAFSA seem to be incorrect or don't match up with information reported elsewhere on the application. This is so that you can correct any errors and complete your FAFSA. The summary also will provide your Student Aid Index, or SAI. This number will determine your eligibility for certain types of financial aid. On your submission summary, you will also have the opportunity to add additional colleges to your FAFSA. You might need to add more colleges if you couldn't fit all of the colleges that you applied to during your first submission of your application, or if you decided to apply to another college after already submitting your form. The summary will also indicate if a student is selected for a process called verification, which means students and families will need to provide additional information to confirm that what they reported on their FAFSA is true and accurate. Verification is a process that the federal government and colleges use to ensure that you receive the financial aid that you deserve. If you're selected for verification, it does not mean that you did anything wrong. The best thing that you can do if a college reaches out and requests certain documents from you is to provide them in a timely manner. If you don't respond to verification requests, you might not be able to access your financial aid. If you have any questions about this or the process more generally, you should talk to your counselor, an advisor, or even reach out directly to the college. And although we won't be watching it right now, I really recommend scanning the QR code you see at the bottom here to access our YouTube channel, which has playlists on the 24-25 FAFSA and other financial aid forums. In that playlist, you can find a great video that goes over what to look for when you're reviewing your FAFSA submission summary. And I'm also just going to share a really quick note here that FAFSA submission summaries are just starting to become available right now. FAFSAs began processing, I believe, last week and are processing over the next few weeks. So if you've already submitted your FAFSA, but your submission summary is not available yet, don't panic. It should hopefully become available soon. Just monitor your email and look out for any notifications from Student Aid or the FAFSA about your submission summary becoming available. I spoke about this briefly on the last slide, but just to provide a little bit more info on it, the Student Aid Index is a number that will determine your eligibility for certain types of financial aid. For example, if you have an SAI between negative 1,500 and 0, you're going to be eligible for the full amount of the federal Pell Grant. As your SAI increases, the amount of Pell Grant you are eligible for will decrease. The college's states and federal government will use your SAI as a measure of need, and it is not the exact amount that you will have to pay for college. Unfortunately, colleges are not always able to offer you the financial aid that you are eligible for. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at your number once it's calculated. Now that we've covered the FAFSA, what steps you need to take, the sections of the form, what to expect after you submit it, let's talk about next steps that you can take after today's presentation. Before starting the FAFSA, it's important for all contributors to create their FSA ID and to gather any necessary materials ahead of time. Be sure to start your FAFSA once it opens and make sure all contributors have completed their sections. Once your FAFSA has been processed, be sure to review your FAFSA submission summary as it becomes available and complete any required actions you might see on it, such as verification. And finally, there are more steps in the financial aid process, like we talked about earlier, that you will need to complete, and we're here to help along the way. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about some other ways that you can get more support. The first thing I really want to highlight is our resource page. Be sure to scan this QR code to check out uAspire's resource page, which has tons of free and helpful resources. It has videos, it has checklists, it has blog posts, and more that cover topics across the financial aid spectrum, not just the FAFSA. It has so many of the resources that we've discussed today during this walkthrough, so please take advantage of it and, make sure that you familiarize yourself with what is out there on it. Common App and uAspire are also hosting 2 other, webinars, YouTube Lives that are going to cover 2 other topics in the financial aid spectrum. We are hosting one about the financial aid offer review, what to expect when you're reviewing your financial aid offers, and Affording College 101, which just is more of a general, I would say, walkthrough that provides a lot of information on the financial aid process. I hope that all of you will be there at those ones too. Look out for more communication from Common App about how to join those. And then finally, if you have any additional questions that come up after today about the FAFSA, I encourage you to reach out to uAspire student support account at you can email us at studentsupport@uaspire.org. We can provide an answer to your question, offer some great resources, or even give you some personalized advice to help you with a more complicated situation and, make sure that you can complete all of the steps in your financial aid process. So now, before we transition into the conclusion, with the survey and the Q&A, I just want to give everyone the opportunity to scan this QR code so that they can access a PDF copy of the presentation. You saw today, this slide deck that you're going to access when you scan the QR code will be an extended version of our walkthrough. So I really encourage everyone to look through it on their own time because it has even more helpful information about what you learned today. And I'll just give everyone a few more seconds to scan that so that they can have access to it. I'm hoping that everyone was able to take advantage of it. I'm now going to pass the mic back to Jamia so that she can walk you through the survey, and then I believe we will have time to answer some questions so everyone can hopefully get all of the information they were hoping for today.
Thanks so much, Erin, for providing this informative overview of the FAFSA. It provided lots of information, lots of conversation happening in the chat area. So I believe that it was delivered and students are benefiting from this information. So here on the screen, you have a moment. Erin just mentioned our session survey. Please take a moment now to scan that QR code or access the link there to complete our short affordability webinar survey. We'd love to hear feedback from you about how the session went and how it benefited you as you navigate the FAFSA. So wait just one moment while you scan that QR code or get down that link to complete the survey. All righty. So now we're going to take some time to address any questions that may not have been answered in the chat area. We've started a couple of questions that we want to make sure that we ask of Erin. So Erin, if you'll join me back in the room to answer those questions. Please note today we'll be answering general questions in the chat. If you have personalized questions related to your FAFSA, the uAspire team is available to assist you. Here you can email them at studentsupport@uaspire.org. Again, that's studentsupport@uaspire.org, and they'll be happy to assist you with your personalized questions. But let's jump into the question answer period. First question, Erin. Can my mom start filling her part of the FAFSA even if she is under identity verification?
That is a great question. So unfortunately, your mom will not be able to fill out her part of the FAFSA from her account until her identity has been verified, and then she'll be able to access the invitation and fill out all the questions that is being asked. However, there is a workaround available for students to answer questions for the parent on the student side of things. If you, for example, have already completed your student section, you should be able to log back in and access your 24-25 FAFSA form. If you click around and re-enter the form, you might be able to click on the parent section and manually enter your mom's information and submit it. Once it's been submitted and your mom's account is verified, which she should be notified about, she can go back in and just sign your FAFSA, double check that everything you entered is correct, and then your form will be completed. But you'll need to manually enter it, and then your mom will have to go back in and sign it in order for your FAFSA to be complete.
Next question. What should we do if our parent does not have a Social Security number, if the claimed parent?
That is another great question, and I will share that I know that there have been a lot of issues this year with the FAFSA for parents who don't have Social Security numbers. According to FSA, that process has parts of it have been fixed in the past week, and they are still ironing out some of the other problems over the next few weeks. They're hoping everything will be resolved by the end of the month. That parent should be able to create an account. They will mark that they do not have a Social Security number on the first page. And then towards the end, after they've, filled out all of the information that everyone has to fill out when they're creating an account, they will either have to verify their identity by answering some knowledge-based questions. It's things like, what is a former address that the parent used to live at? If that knowledge-based pathway isn't presented, then they will be told that they need to email a identity verification email address at Federal Student Aid and submit a form and some verifying identity documents, such as like a foreign passport or a state ID, to prove their information. And we aren't exactly sure how long it will take if you have to email, the identity verification documents for the account to become verified, but they claim it will be 2 to 3 days, hopefully not too long. This process just became available last week. So.
Next question. What should I do this far with all the changes as a community college transfer student?
That is another great question. Thank you for asking that. So for community college students that are planning to transfer, you should still fill out the FAFSA because you are going to be a college student for the 24-25 academic year as well. I would recommend playing it safe. List every college on your FAFSA that you are thinking of applying to, even if you're thinking that maybe next week I might not want to go to that school. Still put it down, just because there have been so many delays with the FAFSA and making corrections to it this year. You will just list all of the schools that you potentially could transfer to on your FAFSA and submit it, and those schools will process your financial aid offers once they receive your FAFSA and your admissions application, after being accepted, of course.
Right, the next question, and this may require some personalized support, but I'll ask this for the group. I am a dual citizen and still cannot submit the FAFSA because it tells me that if I submit it without my parent's signature, I will not receive the aid that I need.
That, unfortunately, again, is just one of the problems we're seeing with the FAFSA this year. There have been some glitches with the parent's signature. We're told that once the FAFSA is processed over the next few weeks, parents will be able to go back in and sign the FAFSA. This is a glitch that the FAFSA is aware of. If you're concerned that your financial aid is, the colleges aren't going to receive your FAFSA and be able to process your financial aid, I would recommend contacting those schools and letting them know what's going on. If the problem continues to persist, I would recommend, like Jamia said, reaching out to the student support email that you see on the screen, and we can provide some potential next steps that you can take as well to get your FAFSA submitted. But I would, wait a little bit, see if it processes and your mom is able to log back in and sign it, or parent is able to log back in and sign it.
Alrighty, next question. I've done my part for the FAFSA 24-25 application, but my mom hasn't been able to access her FSA ID even after submitting for recovery. And we've seen this a couple of times in the chat, so this is going to cover a couple of those things. How can they get back access to the parents' FSA ID after it's been linked to an old phone or email. We've also seen where it was maybe connected to another sibling's information in past years.
That is a great question too. And I know that that's really frustrating, especially if you don't have access to either of the contact methods that are associated with the FSA ID. I would recommend a few potential steps. One is calling FSA's Help Center. You can call them or talk with an agent by live chat. Honestly, sometimes it is faster to get a response by using the live chat feature on FSA's website and letting them know that you're locked out of the account, seeing if there's anything that they can do on the back end. There also should be an option when you're saying, like, when you click, I forgot my username or I forgot my password, you should potentially be able to submit photo documentation, such as a driver's license, to verify that it's you, the correct person, trying to access the account, and they might be able to reset your information for you or give you an opportunity to update the contact information. And finally, if neither of those options work, then especially if it's an issue with the Social Security number, you might need to contact the Social Security Administration, because they're the ones that actually verify people's identities. They're connected to the FAFSA. So I would contact them about that issue. If all else still fails, please reach out to us. And again, we can offer some alternative options, but I would recommend trying those steps first.
Great. This is a question related to tax returns. It says not to submit tax returns to FAFSA contacts back. Are you aware of anything related to that here?
If this is about filing for 2022, you can still submit the FAFSA, and I believe you're able to click on the form that you will be filing. And then once your FAFSA processes and you do file your 2022 taxes, you can go back in and update the information. You just want to make sure you're able to submit the FAFSA if you can right now. If it's something else, then I would recommend contacting your colleges and seeing what they recommend, because again, there are some FAFSA priority deadlines and you want to make sure you're not missing those if you are able to submit the FAFSA form. So I would touch base with your colleges as well if you're encountering this.
Right. Next question. The FAFSA website is apparently banned in my country. So can I fill out a PDF form instead? Student is a U.S. citizen who lives outside the U.S.
Yes, you can always fill out a paper FAFSA. The 2425 paper FAFSA is currently available online. Hopefully you're able to access that link as well. You'll fill it out. Just like make sure you read all of the instructions very carefully on the paper form, because there's not skip logic. Like questions won't automatically be skipped like the electronic version does. And you will have to manually enter all tax information. So I would recommend gathering all financial aid documents. In your case, it might include a foreign tax return and things like that when you fill it out. And then the email, not the email address, the physical mailing address where you have to submit that FAFSA to will be on page 20 of the paper form.
Next question. Must a student invite both parents if one parent includes joint information?
That's a good question too. I know that the parent invitation for FSA IDs has been a little bit confusing this year. So if a student's parents are married and they file their taxes jointly, only one parent needs to be invited. You would only need to invite both parents to fill out separate sections of your FAFSA if they file their taxes separately, or if they got married, between 2022 and 2024.
One other question related to parent. Is there any way to re-invite a contributor to the form? The student's parent logs into the account and is unable to see the invitation to accept it.
Yeah, that's a good question too. I know that this is another glitch that we've been seeing this year. So you can re-invite parents. If you log back in on the student side and go back into your 24-25 FAFSA form, you should see like a square button that says manage contributor information. And when you click on that, you should be able to resend the invite to your parent. If that doesn't work, you might need to restart the FAFSA form and re-invite the parent, but I would try the first thing I mentioned before doing anything else.
One final question related to contributor. They have 2 students in school. So once they complete the contributing information one time, can they use that for the other student?
Yeah, so you are going to have to fill out a parent contributor section for each child. So if you have 2 children that will be in college in the 24-25 academic year, you will have to fill out 2 parent contributor sections associated with each child. You're gonna be putting in really similar information for both, but that's just the way it is with the FAFSA right now. So it will be 2 sections for 2 children.
Once the FAFSA is processed and you need to edit it, like the parent signature situation, does it need to be reprocessed, and how long does that roughly take?
Yeah, that is a good question too. So if there's any issues with your FAFSA, once it processes, you will be able to correct it, such as adding a parent signature. In a normal year, the FAFSA takes 3 to 5 days to process any, FAFSA submission summary. So your first submission of the FAFSA will have FAFSA Submission Summary 1. When you submit the FAFSA again, you'll get a second FAFSA Submission Summary, and you'll be able to access each one throughout the year. However, because of the delays and the FAFSA being a little bit different this year, it could take longer than 3 to 5 days. We honestly don't know just yet because FAFSA's only just started processing, but I do know in a normal year it takes 3 to 5 days.
All righty. 2 final questions. First, I applied to more colleges because the one I listed on my college, more colleges than the one I listed on my college list. Does that mean I need to wait until my FAFSA is processed to go back and add those additional colleges?
Yes, you are correct. You will need to wait for your FAFSA to process in order to access the tool to add more colleges to your FAFSA. Say you've already added 20 colleges, you can delete a few schools because they've already received your FAFSA information, and then add the schools who haven't received your FAFSA information just yet. I know since FAFSAs are processing, this feature might not be available yet for a lot of students. So if this is anything you're concerned about, again, having open communication with the financial aid office at the college that you want your FAFSA sent to can never hurt, so that they know that you're planning on adding them soon.
It's our final question. When my FAFSA is approved, do I hear back on the FAFSA website, or do I hear back from the individual schools?
So technically both. I would say that you would hear back from the FAFSA first. They will let you know that your FAFSA is completed, and you can check the FAFSA submission summary to make sure there are no errors. You'll see an exclamation point on the FAFSA submission summary page if there are any errors. I would say, in a normal year, it would be a week or 2 after your FAFSA processes and is sent to the school that you'll receive your financial aid offer. This year, it could be a little bit longer because schools are going to receive every student's FAFSA at the same time in a huge dump. So everyone that's filled it out since January, schools are receiving those FAFSAs right now. And they're going to have to process a huge amount of FAFSAs. So you should hear from them, I would say, later on in the spring, maybe early summer, and they will also let you know if there are any issues with your FAFSA, if you need to complete any required steps like verification, but you will hear from both the FAFSA and your colleges.
And that question was a perfect segue into an invitation to invite you to join us for our next session in this FAFSA series, which is going to focus on award letter review, financial aid award letter review. So you'll hear more about what happens once you submit your FAFSA. You get the information, you hear from FSA, and then you start to hear from those individual schools as well. So we hope that you will join us for that session on April 17th. Thanks so much to Aaron and Nick from the uAspire team for presenting and providing the information in the session as well as in the chat. Thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. Be well. Have a good evening.